Today in class, we talked about the difference between the selection tool and the direct selection tool. For the first part of today, you're going to practice using the selection tool to resize and rotate objects on the right so they appear exactly like the images on the left. So I would recommend, if you're using the selection tool and you want to make sure this on the right is exactly like this, use the left side as a resource. I'm going to move this pink box over and I'm going to resize it. If I need to keep something in perspective, I have to make sure I hold shift while I resize, and I'll show you what that looks like next. I'm going to move this box right back, and now I have an exact replica. Now the next part, I'm going to zoom in here. You see the house. The house is just way too big. I want to kind of move it over and try to get the right size. But if I start to resize it, I'm going to squish my house down. I have to hold down shift while I take one of the corners and resize. That's going to ensure everything stays in proportion. When I move it over, this looks still a little too big. I'm going to make it a little smaller. And now I have an exact replica. And I'm going to repeat this for the rest of them. This one needs to be rotated. To rotate, it's very similar. I just have to hover my mouse over a corner, get that two-sided arrow, and then rotate as well as resize. You're doing that for the rest of this for part one. For part two, you're going to start utilizing the direct selection tool. We talked about how the selection tool selects an entire object, but the direct selection tool takes a piece of an object. So we're going to do something similar. I'm still going to move this shape over because I want to go from this square to this little like sliver. So I'm going to move it over, but then I'm going to swap to my direct selection tool, which is the white arrow. To use this tool, I simply have to click on one of the anchor points. If I zoom in super close here, you'll see for this square, there are 4 anchor points, one for every corner. These little rounded parts, don't worry about that. That's for rounding on a corner, which we don't need. All we have to do is click the anchor point and bring it in to match it to this shape. Now I want to swap back to my selection tool so I can move it. So remember, we still use the selection tool to move objects, but we're using the direct selection tool to manipulate parts of objects. You're going to repeat that for the rest of these shapes. So I'm going to select this shape with the direct selection tool and kind of move this anchor point up. If you move the whole shape, you might just have to click again. And look at the corners here. These look like these are pulled as well. So it's a lot of repeating of the tools in practice. This next shape requires you to move these little corners in with the direct selection tool so that they're straight. It'll make it look more like a house, right? So really look at how this shape turns into this shape, how the direct selection tool plays a part. You're going to repeat that for all the shapes here. Now in this last part, it's like a mixture of both. So you're going to have to use both the black arrow and the white arrow to make this happen. First things first, I'm going to select the shape and I'm going to have to rotate it with my black arrow first so that it's in this angle. Then I'm going to have to resize it. So I'm going to hold down shift so I don't lose the proportion. And then I'm going to have to figure out how this turns into this. That's the direct selection tool. Now I can pull points, kind of imitate it to make this swan shape. Maybe this point needs to be moved out. And this point moved in. There we go. So it's a little bit of both tools in order for that to happen. That's for the rest of these as well. When you're done, 45 your screens before we move on to the last part of today.